Welcome to Dare to be Seen. Join our host, Alyssa DiNapoli, aka Alyssa Vulpez, author, artist coach, and singer-songwriter, as she engages in down-to-earth, insightful, and inspiring conversations with female indie singer-songwriters, composers, and musicians. We shall discuss the lessons and personal stories of women who dare to be seen, scratching beneath the surface to explore challenging truths, forge deeper connections, and foster personal transformation. Get inspired, and if you enjoy the show, spread the word by subscribing and reviewing it. And now, let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Dare to be Seen. My name is Elisa Di Napoli, aka Elisa Vulpes, and today my guest is Diana Gameros. Diana is a singer, a songwriter, a music instructor, and a social justice activist based in San Francisco, California. She was born and raised in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, and immigrated to the United States as a teenager. Over the last decade in the Bay Area, she has released 2 albums of original songs written in Spanish and English, and Mexican classic songs as well. Diana has been highlighted often by the NPR's Tiny Desk contest series, and a documentary film about her was released by KQED earlier this year. Her music often tells stories of family, migration, identity, and home, and has led her to perform with prominent performers such as John Baez, Natalia Lafourcade, and the San Francisco Symphony. Diana's voice and music have appeared on numerous films, documentaries, and most recently on the television series Mayans MC Soundtrack. Her songs and story have been featured on Billboard, Mother Jones, NPR's Weekend Edition, and PRI's The World, to name just a few. I am very excited to meet Diana today, but before we do, just a short message for you. If you suffer from stage nerves and your anxiety gets in the way of your performance, well, it's time to discover the 3 secrets that will stop stage fright and allow you to perform with authentic confidence, even if you're not an extrovert. So I invite you to register today for my free Dare to be Seen masterclass, where you will discover how to magnify your presence and command the stage so you can perform at your best in front of a larger audience. Just head on over to tinyurl.com/dare to be seen masterclass. That's tinyurl.com/dare to be seen masterclass. And now here's a guest for today.
I think at this point, I've lived almost the same time in both countries. And so I think, my heart is Mexican. I do have to say that. I carry that Americanism or American love with me when I travel to Mexico. And when I'm in the United States, I have my love for Mexico all written over my body. Listening to other people's stories of other immigrants and women, who fled Mexico, fleeing violence or extreme poverty, then for many years I was silent and in the shadows about my status. El aire tiene olor a que alguien murió. Prende la vela, hijita, no llegues tarde, Estelita, que la noche te alcanza y no te vuelvo a ver, y no te vuelvo a ver. I was undocumented. I was an undocumented person who could not return to Mexico, and that ended up being 16 years of not being able to go back home in Mexico. Que la vez espanta y el alma no aguanta de ver pasar los rostros sin vida. The choice to leave your family, to leave all these things behind It takes a lot of courage, right? So the virtues of an immigrant are courage. You have to be brave. You have to have a lot of love in you and a lot of hope to leave with the expectation that a better life is going to find you on the other side or in another country. Hacía falta saber dónde estabas. Deja mejor te cuento de los sueños eternos, del aire que cruza los cercos, de este amor que ahora te ofrezco, mi niña. Verás que la vida va bien, verás que la vida va bien. Always wanted to shift the focus of what it is like for an immigrant once they come here and shift it to, no, who are these people really? Look at all the things that they were bringing with them. Not only should we be welcoming them, but we should be celebrating them, and we should be honored that we are the ones hosting them. No quiero escuchar el rito de los. It is my hope that perhaps through music people can see the humanity in people and can acknowledge the role that we have in loving them and welcoming them and celebrating them. Deja mejor que te cuente desde que era todo verde. Corría si yo no buscaba, no hacía falta saber dónde estabas. Deja mejor te cuento de los sueños eternos, del aire que cruza los cercos, del amor que ahora te ofrezco, mi niño. Verás que la vida va bien, verás que la vida verán que la vida va bien.
Let's welcome to the show today Diana Gameros, all the way from Berkeley, California. Welcome, Diana.
Thank you.
And I am really interested in your many facets as a singer-songwriter, a music creator, but also you are a music instructor and a social justice activist. And if you guys have never listened to the show, I like to cut to the chase and just talk about the important subjects such as these, especially during these times. So now that COVID is happening, I'm sure that there's plenty of issues that are possibly more urgent, but at the same time, the problems of immigration are still present everywhere in the world, very much so at the moment. So first of all, I wanted to ask you, Diana, about your background. I know that you have you've been born and raised in Ciudad Juarez in Mexico, but then you immigrated as a teenager to the US, and I wanted to ask you about that experience because I know that this experience informs your music quite a lot. Is that correct?
Yes, I was born in Ciudad Juarez, and Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, is a border town next to El Paso, Texas, on the American side. Um, and I immigrated to Michigan, to a little town called Holland, Michigan, when I was 13 years old. And I lived with an aunt who sort of, in a way, took the role of a mother for me. I went to school there, not knowing a word of English. So as a teenager, that was a challenge in itself to immerse myself in an environment where, um, yeah, I felt like, like an alien. I know that the US government likes to call us immigrants aliens, but in this case, I actually did feel like one. The culture was very different. I had never lived outside of Mexico, and even though I lived with my aunt who spoke Spanish, everything was in English at school, and I, and that experience itself really shaped me, not just musically and artistically, but it would change me for the rest of my life. And so I ended up spending 2 years with my aunt there, going to school, learning English. And then I actually went back to Mexico and finished high school in Mexico. And then I decided to go back for college to study music. And I, tried the legal route, and my mother helped me get my student visa, but I kept getting denied and denied. And at that point, my desire was so big that I decided to go the, the the unforbidden way, which was I did my 4 years as a college student, as an undocumented student. It was not an easy decision, obviously, because um, there were many things that involved being undocumented. I could not get financial aid. I could not get scholarships that were being sent my way because I had good grades. But so I guess in a way, I pay the price.
And I mean, when you first arrived in the US, was that your choice or was that a choice that your family made for you?
No, it was my choice. It was my choice. And it is precisely because of that that I have a very different immigrant story than the ones that sometimes the media likes to show, and for obvious reasons, right? I think, and every immigrant story is so particular. Every person's story, right, I guess, is unique. It doesn't matter what kind of label you bring with you. Um, but in my case, I think, yeah, I like to say that uh that my choice came from privilege, right? I didn't have to leave, even though my parents, were middle to low class family. Um, and actually, that's one of the reasons why I couldn't get my student visa, because my parents didn't make enough income um, to be able to provide for me. And so what I had to do was I worked my butt off through college because I had to pay every single penny of my tuition, out of my own pocket. And so yeah, it was my choice. And just right there, the fact that it was my choice, and that I flew in a plane, like I did not cross the desert. I think for many years, Mm, I didn't feel like I had a story to tell, especially when meeting immigrants who did cross the border through the desert and whose lives were of more hardship back in Mexico. And so for many, many years, I I I I didn't resent, my status as an undocumented person. If anything, I felt like I I had more excuses to make it. It's funny to say, but, yeah, so in a way, I guess I repressed some of the hardships that I was going through, because obviously there were many, but listening to other people's stories of other immigrants and women, who fled Mexico, they were fleeing violence or extreme poverty, then for many years I was silent and in the shadows about my status.
Then what made you change your mind?
Well, I think moving to San Francisco was another turning point in my life and also in my career. I graduated with a music and a recording technology degree from a community college in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I could not get my bachelor's because as an undocumented person, that was going to be impossible. As attending the Grand Rapids or the community college, um, I was able to do, but I knew that I wasn't going to be able to transfer. And so, but I got my associate degrees and then decided to, yeah, I moved to San Francisco with a, with a lover that I had who lived there. And he invited me to come out and he said, I was actually ready to go back to Mexico because having done 4+ years of undocumented life, I thought it was time for me to go to a place where I felt like I belong, I guess, in a way, or where I had an identity. I was craving to have a valid ID and to be able to go to university, not having to hide my status. And so I actually made the choice to go back, but it's almost like the universe told me or said, "No, it's not your time yet," because I meet this person, I fall in love, and he happens to live in San Francisco, and so I end up moving there in 2008, and that really did change my life. I embraced my life in San Francisco with a having nothing to lose attitude. And so I started making music, playing out, and and yeah, the rest is history. That's how my artistic life began.
Right. And having this background, being at heart, I suppose you would call yourself at heart Mexican, because from my point of view, right? So I am also an immigrant. I was born in Italy and I changed country a bunch of times. I lived in 10 years in Scotland, 12 years in New Zealand, and when people ask me where you from or what do you identify as, I find it difficult to say, I am just this. Yes, I'm Italian because I was born there, but then, I have these other feelings about what home is. So I'm wondering, how do you feel in terms of where your home is? How do you create your identity? Does it revolve around where you are at the time or where you come from or your parents? What's your view?
Yeah, well, I think I carry all of those in me whenever I leave the US and spend time in Mexico. um I feel I feel at home in Mexico, and also I know that I'm carrying this biculturality with me, and so I am bringing my, perhaps we're going to call them Americanized ideas, perhaps, or customs, or um you know ways of doing things, of organizing, or um of being, right. I think at this point I've lived almost the same time in both countries, and so I think my heart is Mexican. I do have to say that. I think, and it shows up in different ways. And so I feel like, because that is my homeland, Mexico is my homeland, I very much feel like a Mexican at heart. However, a lot of the times when I'm in Mexico, there are many things that that come up that have more to do with the American culture, if I'm explaining myself correctly. And I think it's because I've embraced that culture, the American culture, fully and gratefully, and I love being in the United States, and meeting the people that I have met here have been some of the most beautiful gifts, and doing the things that I've done here, haven't been able to make a living of out of being a musician, writing music, singing songs for over 10 years. For me, it's a gift, and it's a gift that was given to me by this land, by this culture, the American culture. And so I'm going to be forever grateful. And so that I carry that with me. I carry that Americanism or American love with me when I travel to Mexico. And when I'm in the United States, I have my love for Mexico all written over my body and my in my songs and in my Spanish and in my recipes and in my and the things and some of the things that I do, or in the volume of or in the way I speak, and uh and how loud I speak, maybe that screams Mexican all over. And so yeah, um I feel the love for both, and I kind of want to say at all times.
This comes across especially in your music. When I was listening to your two albums, so especially the latest one, the Arrullo, there's actually no English songs, whereas in the other album, Eterno Ritorno, there's two songs in English and one in French. And so I wanted to ask you about that, because when I was listening to the Arrulo album, not only the songs are in Spanish, but they really are Spanish in the sense that they felt, not, I shouldn't say Spanish in terms of language, but, they feel Mexican to me in terms of sounds, instruments. And so I was wondering whether that was a conscious choice, what changed from the first album to the second album, and most interestingly, how does the language change your relationship to the song, the way you feel about the song? What makes you decide what language to sing in?
Hmm. Yeah. So to answer the first question, arrullo, which means lullaby, came out of a desire to record Mexican songs, Mexican classics for many years. And actually, what sort of gave me, um, um, what provided an income for me arriving in San Francisco in 2008 was playing at a restaurant every Friday and Saturday in the Mission District of San Francisco. And so, yeah, I play mostly Mexican songs. I also did a lot of indie folk, American covers, and kind of music from all over the world, really. South America, France, Spain, and but mainly Mexican songs because it was a Mexican restaurant. And I played there for 5 years, actually. And I always had this great desire to record the songs that I would play there. But obviously, the first album that I recorded, I wanted it to be of original songs, and so that's why Eterno Retorno came first. I had all of these, all these songs that were the fruit of my journey as an immigrant, and of my relationship to other immigrants, and of listening to their stories. So it was an inspiration, I was inspired by those stories, by my own story, and by the whole narrative of what being an immigrant means, and also the diversity of cultures. Is why the album is in Spanish and in English. And I even threw a French poem that I set to music. Actually, that song, um, in French was a poem that I found. I went to a Goodwill, like I think it was the first week that I arrived in San Francisco. I went to Goodwill and I found this really thin, beautiful um, poem book from 7 women from France. And I loved that poem so much that I set music to it, and I decided to record it because it was kind of very symbolic for me as I arrived in San Francisco to have found that poem. And it was also kind of a way for me to show my love for diversity. And so, yeah, that's why Eterno Retorno came first. And I actually, if I may speak a little bit about the title, it doesn't really have much to do with that philosophical idea of the eternal return. It was, for me, was more of a play of words, because at that time and for many years, I mean, I was undocumented. I was an undocumented person who could not return to Mexico, and that ended up being 16 years of not being able to go back home in Mexico. And so in Spanish, we say, if I just read eterno retorno, literally, it means that it's taking a long, long time to return to my homeland. And so that's why I wanted to call it eterno retorno, because my status was still kind of in the limbo. There was no end in sight for my undocumented status until many, many years later. And so that's where the title came. And so that's why it was such an important project for me, such an important album. And then when Arrullo came, actually, it came through a grant that I received from Women's Audio Mission, which is an organization that empowers women, especially queer and BIPOC women, to become audio engineers and electronic musicians, and so yeah, and to change the face of sound. And so they gave me this grant, and I recorded this album there, and I chose to record the Mexican classics because, um, for me, it was also a tribute that I was paying to my homeland, the homeland that I left so many years before, and it was a way for me to reconnect with my roots, with my music, the music of my childhood, because these songs were songs that I learned and that I heard in my travels to my grandmother, to my grandparents' farm. And it was a tribute to family, to Mexican gatherings, to Mexican music and folklore. And it was also a very maternal album. During that time that I recorded that album, the energy or spirit of my late um, great grandmother was very present with me. And and when trying to choose what theme, there are so many Mexican songs I couldn't choose, so I just thought I would narrow that down by choosing songs that sounded more like lullabies, songs that would comfort me or any Mexican who is longing for home. And so, that's why the pink and the design and the photo of my grandma hidden there on the collage, and the voice of my grandmother on the record. I sing a song with my mother. I sing a duet with her. Um, yeah, so it was more of a tribute than anything else.
And in your Dear Homeland documentary, one of the things that struck me was when you say, people leave their home countries because they have to. Most of them anyway. It takes a lot of courage to leave one's home, and it's not to just come and take your job. One of the things that I like about this is that it makes it really human. It makes people understand what it takes to leave one's country. It's not a decision that we make lightly, especially if then you are doing it in a undocumented way, which means that then you won't be able to go back. And is this what makes you different in your approach as a social justice activist? Because I know you are really invested in talking about stories of migration, family, identity, and home, but you're doing it in a different way. Rather than talking about politics, you're talking about human stories.
Yes, absolutely. And I think for me, having lived as an undocumented person gave me enough knowledge or enough feeling of what it is like to be in a different land, to leave your family behind, to leave your customs behind, to leave your geographical land, right? Because it's not, you're accustomed to the plants of your region, to the weather, to the mountains, to the valleys, to the oceans, to the warmth. Um, you leave so much behind, and you live with that nostalgia. And so I feel like having lived that experience gave me enough. enough to grasp on to be able to feel what others were going through. However, when I explored and when I started to learn about some of the other hardships that other immigrants were facing, I started to learn where they were coming from, what was happening in their countries for them to decide to leave. And again, I think for me, it was very important to share with my audience, especially uh, the fact that that people were coming from beautiful places, from places where they had same thing, where they had family, and so, like you say, Elisa, to the choice to leave your family, your to leave all these things behind, it's it takes a lot of courage, right? So the virtues of an immigrant are courage. You have to be brave. You have to have a lot of love in you and a lot of hope to leave with the expectation that a better life is going to find you on the other side or on another country. Um, a lot of love for your children, a lot of love for community, because a lot of the people leave, with all these expectations, and so they must be optimists as well. So I just always wanted to shift the focus of what it is like for an immigrant once they come here and shift it to, no, who are these people really? Look at all the things that they were bringing with them. Not only should we be welcoming them, but we should be celebrating them, and we should be honored that we are the ones hosting them. We should be honored that they are choosing us to they're choosing our land to bring their new language, their new recipes, their new ideas, their new hopes. Like, who does not want somebody who's courageous and brave and an optimist? And aside from that, like, whose endurance, I mean, I don't know who does that. You have to be physically, you're a superhero in my mind if you can cross the desert, if you can get on that train, and I'm mainly talking about, I know that there are immigrants of all, that come from different countries, but I suppose in my narrative I usually focus on Central Americans and Mexicans, because those are the ones whose stories I've heard the most, and who, and I have some of my friends have gone through that journey. And so those are the ones that I can speak about, and those are the ones that I know and I love. And so for me, it's I want to speak about them, but not, you know, about them, but also about us. Like, who are we in their presence, and how are we viewing our role as inhabitants of this land now, right? Because even though I'm not a citizen, I only have a green card. Um, I still feel the responsibility to spread this message of, it is we who should be honored that people are coming to this land, that they have chosen us, and change the sight from them being a victim, which in a way they have been, right? They have been victims of political interventions, like of US foreign policy. And we could get into that, but I won't even get into that, because it is my hope that perhaps through music, people can see the humanity in people and can acknowledge the role that we have in loving them and welcoming them and celebrating them.
I love how you use the role of the artist as someone who can give a different perspective to the usual narrative of us versus them, victims versus losers and winners, and victims and perpetrators, and it makes it all a lot more rounded. The perspective becomes bigger, and it puts us in the same place. This is sure Earth full of countries, but it is, at the end of the day, just one planet, and we are all just human beings. So I have got a pretty cosmopolitan view, and I don't really like to identify too much with a country, even though I appreciate cultural differences. But I think, for me at least, the sense of belonging I get is from hanging out with people whose values I share, while also accepting, that other people have different values. I'm not interested in creating a war. I'm more interested in creating a community that understands each other through our differences.
Mm.
So I love how you do that in your music directly, and I'm curious as to whether you started your journey as a musician before you left before you left Mexico or afterwards. What created this love for music? How did it emerge in your life?
Yeah, well, I think I always knew I wanted to do something in the humanities or art realm. And I started playing piano when I was 5 years old, and I learned guitar when I was 11. And there was always music in my house and in our family reunions. Music was very came about very naturally in my family and in me, because I did take piano lessons, and I took up the guitar and learned by myself. But it was something that really that gave me a lot of pleasure, and it gave me meaning in a way. I was always a very curious child, and kind of like I was very different from my other four siblings, and I was like the weird one of the family, let's say it. I think, well, all artists have at some point have felt this, like, sort of, I felt a little bit isolated because I just had these weird ideas, even like among my friends in Juarez. Like, I was the one that they couldn't really understand, or I had, the most like radical ideas and strange ideas. I was the strange one of the group. And so um I kind of always knew that I wanted to be a musician. I wasn't exactly sure how that was going to materialize, but I knew I wanted to have music in my life forever. And I think what was really helpful was that my mother was extremely supportive of that. She was the one who would carry my guitar up to the lessons. We would walk around the corner from my house. There was a church that was giving lessons, and then she would subscribe me, or she would find me a teacher. She drove me to my piano lessons. Like, um, she was very committed to my development as a musician, never thinking that I would take it up as a career. But when I decided that that's what I wanted to do, my mother actually said, Diana, you can do actually whatever you want, and you're going to succeed. So it wasn't even, she didn't even say, yeah, I give you permission. She just say, I support you in whatever you want to do. And I think for me, that was very liberating, because I never had some of the challenges that a lot of kids or youth who want to become musicians have, because of their parents' wishes for them. And so in that regard, that was really helpful in my commitment to to having music in my life forever. And I think for me, that meant I need to do this as a living. And that's why I decided to study music, and then um took up songwriting more seriously, and performing and connecting with other musicians, so that I could, um, yeah, make a living out of that.
Yeah, I can relate to that. During this podcast interviews with many other singer-songwriters, one of the things that I found that a lot of them had in common was a background that was supportive. And it's a lot easier when you come from a family that really appreciates music. It's not, of course, impossible to be a singer-songwriter and to be successful, whatever success means to you, if you don't have that support. But of course, it is easier if you do. And you mentioned making a living through music. Is that mainly through music, being a music instructor or a performer? How have you navigated these times, especially in 2020?
Yeah, well, I think it has mainly been through performing, I would say. ever since I arrived in San Francisco, my main gig was that restaurant, and I'll always be grateful for it because and actually I always like to speak about the owner of that place because at that time he was also an undocumented person, and but he gave value to the music and to what I was bringing into the restaurant. And and later I found out what musicians were making, when they were gigging in restaurants, and I could not believe uh, how broad that difference was. Like, I was making way more than what other restaurants, what other musicians were making, and it really was not. I didn't even know. I arrived in San Francisco thinking that that's what all musicians were making because that was my first gig, and so that's not to sort of put the focus on like how much money I was making, but more on the heart and the value that this man had for music. And so yeah, that provided an income for me enough to pay my rent in San Francisco and to be able to not have to have a second job or a day job, and then just commit myself to writing songs and developing my art and allowing for creative space and being able to network and yeah, and grow as a musician. So I always like to speak about the generosity of that man, because I think had not have been for that gig that I had for many years, um, I also met a lot of musicians through there because it was a steady gig every Friday and Saturday. Diana Gameros was playing there. And so I got a lot of, just like the more side gigs, which were like wedding gigs. And then organizations started to, because I was in the Mission District, I think that was also very helpful because um, I started to get gigs from different types of people, like private gigs and organizations. And then I started to meet other musicians who were abundant in that area. And so it was such a gift to have landed that gig. And so yeah, so then I started to perform a lot. It was not after like probably 4 years later that I recorded my album. So really my income has mainly come from performing, and then eventually like different collaborations that I made with people that sort of led to more collaborations and to more high profile performances, and then reviews, and then and it's like a little avalanche that starts growing, and then all of a sudden you have a presence in the area. And you know what, something too that I like to mention is that, like the silver linings of my undocumented status was I couldn't travel, right? And so, like, I was not a touring artist. And so, my whole career, or at least for those 5 years that I was there, um, I was very present in the Bay Area. That meant that whenever somebody needed me for a gig or for a panel or for a rally, because I also did a lot of that too. I did a lot of free or charity gigs, I guess, or I gave my performances to rallies, or I played at hospitals or schools and hospices. And so um, that eh, that gave me a lot of people could rely on me. So whenever people needed me for a performance or for a project or a panel, I was a yes person. I'd always be available because I was there. I was not touring, like my status kind of didn't allow for that. Um, and so and because I really couldn't take another job, I said when I remember making that choice when I moved to San Francisco, I said, okay, I'm gonna move to San Francisco. I'm not gonna go back to Mexico, but I'm only gonna do music. If I have to work a side job and I just do not want to go that route. Besides, the e-verify thing, like it's not gonna roll. Like I won't be able to get another job. I'm undocumented, and so I was very determined to only do music.
In a way, it sounds like, the problem became a gift.
Yes, and it's funny because I do attribute my permanence in the Bay Area, like the amount of gigs that I was getting, I attribute it to the fact that that it was kind of hard for me to travel and to do that, and so I was kind of the person to go to, and it was because of that that I just started getting more and more gigs and meeting interesting people, interesting artists, and being part of amazing projects and getting grants and so so that's been pretty much the story of my life as a musician and how I've been able to sustain myself through that, a combination of all of those things that have provided, an income, a sustainable living. Yeah.
Living in a society where usually the worth of something is often measured by money and the sales you make, how much money you make, it can be easy to fall into the trap of not believing that you're a real musician unless you are in the minority, that managed to make a living of it, which you have. But I want to ask you, what does success mean to you really as a musician?
Well, I think before you said as a musician, before because you asked, what is success for you? I had the answer. So you said, what does success mean to you? And then you said, as a musician. And so, like, when you said success means to you, I thought of something right away. And then you said, as a musician. And then I thought, you know what? It's the same one. And I guess success for me is, living a good life. And I could say that as a musician as well, because ultimately, before I am a musician, I am a human being, and being a musician is it's only one of my roles as a one of the roles that I have as an inhabitant of this planet, and I think that has become more clear even in this last year. I lost my father last year in January before COVID hit. And a lot of things changed for me. And then COVID hits, and then I'm even more aware of what my role is as a human, or what I want from life. And and that's it. I want to live a good life. And for me, living a good life is being able to appreciate the things that I have around me, being able to live in the present moment, as cheesy, as cliche as that sounds, but no, really to live that way. Because I think many times we hear those cliche phrases, but am I really living and loving and forgiving fully, and be of support for my community, and doing the things that I love, and nourishing my friendships. um and so when I think of music, I think music is just a beautiful way to sort of wrap all these things, like wrap my whole life with this beautiful wrapping paper. Music does that. It's like music envelops this life. But I think in order for me to be successful at music, I need to be having a good life, and being able to love, and to appreciate the ones that I have around me. And so, despite of everything, I'm in a very good moment of my life, where I think it's because having experienced so many losses this past year, personal ones, and just in my close circle. Really, when I think back, or when I think of my present and what I have, heck yes, I'm successful. Of course, I am having a good life. In the big scheme of things, I am. And as long as I'm able to, strum my guitar and use my voice and share my music, yes, I am successful.
Yes, I like I think this view on loss is quite poignant because we can use loss in two different ways. You know, we can allow it to annihilate us, you know, and make us feel like, what's the point? Or it can do the opposite in reminding us that we have so much to live for, that we are lucky, that we're not dead, that we are actually here now, and it can wake us up. You know, that idea of being grateful for all the things you could have lost. For example, first of all, your life, and you haven't lost it, and just remembering that can be a real eye opener, I think. Processing loss, though, I think there's also a time for mourning and a time for being sad. And do you use your music to process your difficult or more challenging feelings, or for healing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and I think I would say probably my most vulnerable song, or a song that came out uh, of mourning and of questioning and of um, being sort of in that state of sorrow and of longing um, and trying to understand life and loss and distances. And the song that I included in my album Eterno Retorno, the song Como Hacer, is one of those songs that expresses all of that. Most of my songs are, they expose like a not a problem, but like, I have they all have like happy resolutions to them, and they end on hopeful notes. But on this song, that was one of the songs where I decided that it was okay to be vulnerable, and that it was okay to ask questions and not have the answers to them. And so yeah, and just like that song, I think I haven't recorded any like that recently, but I know that I've, now with the advent of, like with how popular it is to like to go live, there were many days after the passing of my dad during quarantine that I would just like go live in the middle of the night and would use music as a form of prayer and mourning, but I would share it with people. And I don't know, there was something special about having people join me as I mourn, as I sang these songs of um, of remembrance. And most of the times these were improvisations that I would do vocally and musically, and sometimes I would like read a book or read a poem, and would just be in the now, in the moment, with my feelings of sorrow, and I would share it with with a live audience on Instagram. And but those moments were actually very healing and very, very meaningful. And then I ended up getting messages from people saying I really needed this, and so that's when I knew that, when you share um your grief, eh, it can also be beautiful. I'm not saying that you have to and that it's better, but it can lead to really beautiful things and to collective healing.
And on that note, before the interview started, we talked about a song that you wanted to share live with our audience, an a cappella song that your grandmother taught you, and it's about, if I understand well, remembering our loved ones who have passed, And so I would say this is an apt moment to actually perform that song. And the name of the song is Cuando dos almas, which means when two souls.
Yes. Speaks of the love of two souls, that it doesn't matter if one parts or if one passes, the love will remain. And it's that person who passes that is asking, please bring me flowers and lay them on my grave. And this is how we'll be connected. Do not ever forget about me. Cuando dos almas se quieren, por más que se alejan, no se puede nunca olvidar. Por eso cuando yo muera, vidita mía, nunca me dejes de amar. Si vas al campo donde los muertos reposan ya, vas a mi tumba y ahí solita la encontrarás. Llévame flores, muchas gardenias y un rosal, que sean violetas y no me olvides nunca jamás.
That was really touching. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's something to be said about singing in our native language. There's something really different coming out. I'm not sure what it is, but I felt it there. It's just very genuine, you know, and it comes from a deep place. Well, I really want to thank you for this very soulful interview. And if any of our listeners are interested in your music, the links will be in the show notes. So just head on over there and you'll find Diana's links for her music, her documentary, and everything that she's doing at the moment.
Thank you so much, Elisa. It was truly a joy and a pleasure to talk with you.
That was my guest, whom I'd like to thank once again for coming to the show. Every week, I'll be chatting to fantastic indie performers to uncover what it really takes to be an independent musician in this day and age, and how we can support one another to keep shining our own unique light onto this world through our creative endeavors. So make sure you don't miss out by subscribing to Dare to Be Seen and follow us on socials at Elisa Vulpes. This podcast is a creation of EDN Publishing and Elisa Vulpes production, and it was recorded and produced by myself, Elisa Di Napoli. If you enjoy it and would like to support future episodes, you can do so by going on to my website, daretobeseen.com, and clicking on the tab Support Me, or simply by leaving a review. Thank you.
Join the conversation on daretobeseencommunity.com and help us create an empowering community of independent female singer-songwriters, composers, and musicians who support one another. For show notes, resources, and information on today's episode, visit daretobeseenpodcast.com. And remember, shine your own unique light onto the world. It needs it.